Hey friends, welcome back. My name is Danielle and this is Daniela Diaries. Hey friends, welcome back. So twice a month here in Daniela Diaries, we cover a Chicago true crime case. So it's something that I just love to share with you guys. I'm a big true crime fanatic, murder mysteries, all the things, and I love to share them with you, especially the Chicago true crime because that's where I'm from. So I like to share, my hometown with you guys. So each episode contains a different story from a different person, different era, and we sit down and I just basically tell you guys the story or the case of the topic. So today we are covering the lipstick killer. I'm gonna warn you, if you're anything like me, this case is going to infuriate you. It's gonna leave you having so many questions, and it's going to piss you off. You're going to leave this video being pissed off. I'm forewarning you. So let's get into it. This is the case of the lipstick killer. William George Heirens was born November 15th, 1928 in Evanston, Illinois. He was a son of George and Margaret Heirens. He grew up poor. His family were just, immigrants. They came here from, I believe, Germany, and they were just trying to make their way. And they fought a lot. It was a very, chaotic house, and William found himself just trying to be anywhere but there. He wanted to escape the chaos, so he would just kind of run the streets. And while he was out, he picked up a nasty habit of burglary. He was kind of like, what do they call, like a juvenile delinquent or kind of like a punky kid, and he would like to break into people's house and steal things. He was not like a violent offender, but he just liked the thrill, and he liked to take things that wasn't his. So unfortunately for William, this got him into a lot of trouble at a very young age. At 13, William was arrested for carrying a gun and burglarizing a home, and at that time he was caught, he was arrested, and then he was sent to kind of a wayward home for boys. He was there for several months, and when he came back, there was no rehabilitation in that wayward home for boys. It was kind of like it was juvie. It was like a little jail for little kids. And once he came back out, he was right back up to his old ways, and he just continued stealing. So he was caught again because, he wasn't a smart burglar. So when he was caught again for the second time, he was sent to the St. Bede's Academy, which I believe was in Indiana, and it was ran by the Benedictine monks. And while he was there, he did really, really well. He started getting really into school, and while he was there, he was taking a lot of tests, and he really exceeded in academics. He was so smart. They were super impressed by how well and how quickly he caught on to things, and how just he was like a natural genius when he was able to apply himself. So while he was there, he was encouraged by the monks to apply to the University of Chicago, which, remember, we've had Leopold and Loeb. They were also little baby geniuses, and he was accepted at the age of 16 to the like the gifted program for University of Chicago, and he basically surpassed high school. And at 16, in the fall, he was going to go ahead and start college at the U of C. So in the fall of 1945, William Heirens was 16 years old, and he was to start his freshman year of college at the University of Chicago. So while starting there, he didn't come from money like we had seen previous, previous students. It's a very, it was a highfalutin school, it's the elite lived in that area and attended this school. So, it was kind of a struggle for him. Evanston now is a very, very high elbow kind of area, but his family were not. So they couldn't pay for him to, attend. They couldn't pay for him to go ahead and do anything there. It was all on him. If he wanted to do this, he was going to have to do it himself. So he was traveling initially when he started college at U of C, but he ended up just going ahead and doing the on campus, living in the dorms. And while he was there, he worked several days a week. He was working in the chow halls and restaurants, and he was doing the movie theaters, the ushers for the movie theaters. He was tutoring, and he also went back to stealing because he knew it was a quick way to get cash, and he needed it because he wanted to stay where he was. June 5th, 1945, Josephine Ross was found murdered in her apartment. She had reportedly been stabbed, and actually was stabbed so much that it led to decapitation. So when the police found her body, she had several stab wounds and her head was dismembered and found wrapped in a blanket. It was thought by the police that kind of the scene, that when they walked in, that she must have walked in on a burglar and startled them, and then that burglar went ahead and murdered her. But the thing is when they did check the scene, nothing was missing. Nothing was, they didn't steal anything. She was just, murdered. What they did find that was different with her case, though, was all her stab wounds were covered in adhesive tape. Like, I don't know if they thought they could, like, fix her by, like, covering up with, like, Scotch tape. I don't know. But she was covered in, like, Scotch tape, so that was, like, weird, right? So, like I said, none of her valuables were taken. They questioned her ex-husband. They questioned her fiancé. They questioned any of ex-boyfriends, anybody who would possibly have any issues with her. They questioned, and everybody had an alibi. Nobody knew what happened to this young lady. So it was kind of like, wow, these things really didn't happen. You hear them now, and it's just like, oh gosh, it's terrible. But at this point in life, things like this really didn't happen too often. There was a witness that said he did remember seeing a dark-haired man, a middle-aged man, kind of hanging around the apartment building, but they really didn't pay attention to him. It was one of those things where you just kind of see somebody and you're like, oh, okay, and you just kind of kept on going. But they said they remembered a middle-aged man with dark hair kind of hanging around the apartment, but nobody else seen them and nobody else could identify that person. On December 10th, 1945, Frances Brown was found murdered in her apartment. She had a knife lodged in her neck and a bullet wound to her head. How her body was discovered, that there was a cleaning lady working in the apartment building and she had heard loud music playing from the apartment, but when she was walking by, she had seen that the lady's apartment door was kind of open, so she peeks in there, and that's when she found the body just laying there. When the police arrived, they did notice something a little bit different with Frances's body. Her body had been washed clean, but again, her head was wrapped in a towel. There was something else that they noticed, that the killer had left a note for them. Written in lipstick on the wall, it said, "For heaven's sakes, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." So that was very off-putting, and they were like, what the hell? Like, what's going on here? So that was kind of like a spooky omen to know that there was more to come. Much like the previous murder, they assumed that Frances Brown had walked into her apartment and caught a burglar off guard, and that, triggered the attack, and that's who killed her. But again, much like the other murder, there was no valuables missing. Nothing was taken. So I don't know where they kept getting this, like, burglary thing from. It's weird, but it gets weirder. Hold on. So a doorman that was working in Frances Brown's building did notice in the middle of the night a dark-haired man had came through the lobby, and he had never seen him before, but he looks very nervous and kind of frantic, and he was about 35, 40 years old, about 160, 170 pounds. He had dark brown hair. He was wearing a fedora hat and kind of like one of those, like, I don't know, like Dick Tracy jackets, and he was kind of like a little off, and he was just trying to be like frantic and run out the door, and that's all that they seen. Another neighbor reported at 4 a.m. that they did hear a gunshot, but nobody called the police. I don't know why. And nobody had any ideas who killed these two women, and it kind of just, it was big news, but it kind of just went cold. On January 7th, 1946, Suzanne Degan was a 6-year-old girl. Her mom had put her to sleep the night before, and at the next morning, which was the January the 7th, had got up to wake up her kids to send them off to school. When the mom had went to the daughter's bedroom, she had noticed the daughter was gone and the daughter's bedroom window was open. When she looked out her daughter's bedroom window, she had noticed that there was a ladder outside of her daughter's bedroom, and she panicked. So she called the police. Police came rushing. The police did find a ransom note in the girl's bedroom. I'm going to go ahead and read this to you because I have it written down. I also believe I have a picture I can put. I also want you to pay attention to something, okay? I want you to pay attention to the spelling, the punctuation, and the grammar used in this note. But I'm going to read it to you. Get 20,000, it says, Gel 20,000 Reedy and waits for word. Do not notify FBI or police. Bills in 5s and 10s. Burn this for her safety. That was what the note said. So during the time of the police are searching for this little girl, they're trying to figure out who took her. throughout this day, there had been multiple calls of people calling to check about the ransom. They wanted to know, where's the ransom? Where's the ransom? When are you bringing it? But it was just quick questions and then they would hang up. There was never any really back and forth communication to figure out who had the daughter, anything. It was just, do you have the ransom? Where's the ransom? And then they would hang up. The Chicago mayor at the time was George Kelly, and he also received a letter during the time of Susan Degan's disappearance. I'm going to go ahead and read you what his letter said. This is to tell you how sorry I am not to get old Degan instead of his girl, Roosevelt. And the OPA made their own laws. Why shouldn't I? And a lot more. And this is what I want to explain to you about the OPA and what was going on involving Suzanne Degan's father at this time. During this time, there was a nationwide meat packers strike, okay? Chicago, a lot of people came to Chicago for the slaughterhouses, for the meatpacking district. It was a huge moneymaker, and this was also post-World War II. So a lot of people had came home, they were looking for jobs, and it was huge here. It was huge. So much money was to be made, so many jobs. It really brought a lot of immigrants and a lot of new people to Chicago for work, were the meatpacking districts. So 1945, during this time, huge strike, a lot of people out of work. It was really, really bad. And it's, you know, if you've ever been, I'm a daughter of a union worker, and when they go on strike, it is serious. Anybody tries to cross that picket line, or it is rough, okay? And this is now where there's a little bit more, you know, there's more lines to be crossed. Imagine back then where there was a free-for-all. So it was very dangerous to be somebody who was going against the strike, okay? The OPA was the Office of Price Administration, and they were kind of working with the owners and the people who own the meatpacking companies, and the strikers were pissed off at this company, okay? They wanted to go ahead and put stipends on a lot of dairy products, and they were basically backing the meat owners to let the strike continue. They did not want to give. So a lot of these workers hated the meatpacking companies, and they hated the OPA because they didn't want to work with the workers, and they were causing a lot of problems. So Suzanne Degan's dad was a big CEO and administrator for OPA. He had just moved here with his family from a different state to take on this position to kind of keep the strike going, if you would say. You know, he was the one like, yeah, you know what, I don't care if they're striking, we're going to get what we want. And they were not willing to kind of go back to the table and meet with the union workers and meet with the you know, the union delegates and stuff like that. So a lot of these people really, really hated the OPA and the meatpacking companies. Suzanne Degan's parents and family were even assigned armed guards to protect them because there had already been so many you know, threats against them, for their safety, for not only the dad and the mom, but for their kids. This was an ongoing problem. It was an issue, okay? This wasn't just, she wasn't, for me at least, I don't feel like she was just some random kid that was like plucked out of, you know, a many. I feel like this family was very targeted. So they were searching for Suzanne's body, they were searching for Suzanne, and they were trying to figure out where she was. This is also at a time where people didn't lock their doors. Chicago wasn't Chicago now. It was very safe. And they didn't worry about their kids and stuff like that. This isn't the world that they were living in. Unfortunately, a few blocks away, they found Suzanne Degan's body. They found her head floating in a drain. And then a few blocks away, they started finding other parts of her body. When the media heard about this case, it blew up. This was the first nationwide case post-war era. It was crazy. You know, it was very much like Leopold and Loeb, but this was 20 years later. You remember, Leopold and Loeb was in the 20s. This is the late 40s, post-World War II, and kids were always a safety. No one messed with the kids, all right? So many men and women were questioned. I want to say they said they questioned up to 370 different men and women. And each time the police caught a different person, this was the we found this woman and she's the person, or we found this man and he's the person. You know, it was so much heat on the police that they just had to find somebody. The pressure was on. Came from an affluent family. It was a little girl, and it was all over the media. So right in front, they ended up finding a building, and they were able to trace it back to where Suzanne Degen was dismembered. And that body in that building, they had a 65-year-old janitor that was working there. This janitor was an immigrant. So the police went ahead and they caught him. They went and they arrested him and they questioned him. The police beat this man. They starved this man. They wouldn't let him drink. They wouldn't let him eat. They wouldn't let him sleep. They were trying to force him into a confession. This man barely spoke English and he could not write in English, and he would not break. They were doing everything and he refused. He said, I did not do it. They ended up holding this man for 2 whole days, beating him, not feeding him, not giving him water, not letting him use the bathroom, and he just refused. He refused, and they had no choice but to let him go. This case went cold for months. And the media was not happy. And I also want to tell you that the media at this time had no, I mean, you think they're bad now, like the paparazzi's bad. They were worse in the 40s and 50s. They had no, they didn't have to have credible sources. They didn't even have to, I mean, they very rarely print the truth now, but they really could just make up anything. They could go in, they would show up at crime scenes. They would hear it before they would happen or before the cops would get there. They would walk into the crime scenes and touch stuff. You know, like, it was a mess. They were a mess. The state's attorney was getting a lot of heat, and he went on the media, he went on the news, he spoke to media, he said, this case will be solved. It will be solved. I will solve it. We will have somebody arrested for this case. So he knew, you know, people were watching, the bigwigs were watching, and if he wanted to be reelected, he needed to get his shit together and he needed to arrest somebody. I don't think he cared who it was at this point, to be completely honest. The coroner's report came in, and after checking the dismemberment of Suzanne Degen's body, the coroner's report was very specific, and I actually wrote down what the coroner's report said, so I'm going to go ahead and read that to you, okay? It says the coroner's report read as follows, okay? So the killer had to be either a man who worked in a profession that required the study of anatomy, or one with a background in dissection. Not even an average doctor could be this skillful. It had to be somebody who was a meat cutter. It had to be somebody who was a meat cutter, or basically a surgeon. Okay, there you go. There is the correlation. It's somebody, right? We're here, right? We're here. We see that. So let's get back to the phone calls, right? The people who are calling about the ransom. The police ended up, you know, they're sweeping the neighborhoods. They're just arresting up anybody who they felt could be of help or useful. They were picking them up. They're like, hey, come with us. We're gonna talk to you. They ended up picking up a local, like, neighborhood boy. His name was Theodore Campbell, and he's like, hey, what do you know? And he's like, oh, you know what? I'm pretty sure they probably roughed him up a little bit, and he started singing like a canary. So he went on to tell them the story about, he told them about Vincent Costello. Vincent Costello was another local kid from the neighborhood, kind of a punk as well. And he said that he was bragging that he was the one who kidnapped Suzanne Degen, that he was the one who killed her, and that he was the one that was going to go ahead and get the money and for the ransom, that he was going to get the $20,000. So he was the one that was calling the family house, and he actually had Theodore help him as well. And he said, hey, let's both call, let's get this money. So they went ahead and they picked up the Vincent Costello, and they started really interrogating him, and then the kid's story fell apart. Basically what happened is the kid really didn't know anything, and when he lives in the neighborhood, and when all the police were out there and the reporters and everything, he kind of had an earshot, and he heard that there was a ransom note and stuff like that. So they were able to go ahead and kind of beat to it, and that's why they just try to call and get the ransom. They weren't the killers, they weren't even involved, but they were just opportunists at the time. February 1946, Suzanne Degen's arms were found. This little girl was completely dismembered. This is very, very graphic, and I hate to keep talking about it, but it just kind of put more gas on the fire, and they were like, look, we have to get this done. They had no leads, and at this time in February, there was almost 400 different people that they had investigated, and they had no leads. Richard Russell Thomas was a nurse here, and he was currently, when they finally caught up to Richard Thomas, he was serving time in Phoenix, Arizona, because he was arrested and on trial for molesting one of his own daughters. Okay, so he was already a piece of crap. And he was actually, a tip that came in, that someone had seen him in that area. So he was here, he was working as a nurse here in Chicago. He actually lived on the south side, but he would frequent a bar that was on the same block as Susan's family home, and he would, you know, walk past her house all the time, and that's where he would be a majority of the time. Okay, so he lived on the south side, but he frequented the north side, and he also worked on the north side, and he was a nurse. So he was on trial for molesting his own daughter. He also had a past history of kidnapping and writing ransom notes to try to get some money out of stuff. And he was in Chicago during the murder of this little girl. And one of the police officers from Phoenix went ahead and checked the ransom note and compared his signature to the note, the handwriting of the person who wrote the ransom note. And they were like, damn, that's pretty spot on. Like it's a pretty good match. So the police in Phoenix went ahead and they started to question him about, you know, his whereabouts, if he heard about this murder. And guess what? Guess what? He confessed. He confessed that he killed little Suzanne Degan. He confessed. So even though we have this confession of this inmate who's already in jail, he's in Phoenix, the police are like, oh my God, we're in Chicago, he's in Phoenix, extradition, I don't know, do we want to deal with that? I don't know. There's still hemming and hawing. June 26, 1946, here comes William Heirens. He's back in the picture. And William had a date that night of that day. So it was early in the day. Later on that night, William had a date and he had no money because, you know, he's just, you know, he's poor. So he decided, you know what, I need to make some fast cash. And how does William make fast cash? He steals. He burglarizes homes. So he breaks into a house and he's trying to like steal some stuff, and he is actually caught. He's caught by a resident of the apartment building and the janitor of the apartment building. So they catch him and they're chasing him and he's trying to get away, and they ended up blocking him in so he couldn't get away while they're, you know, the police were already been called and they're trying to like kind of hold him in. And William pulls out a gun and he's like, hey, if you guys don't let me go, I'm gonna shoot you in the guts. He actually says guts. I never actually heard anybody say shoot you in the guts, but that's, you know, 1946 and that's how they talk. So you know, they ended up holding him. The police come. The police ended up you know trying to get to him. He has the gun out, and the police tackle him to the ground, and when they tackle him to the ground, the gun goes off. Nobody is like, I think it misfires is what they say, and nobody was hurt except for William. He has like a pretty bad concussion, and when they knock him down to the ground, he actually like busts his head and he goes unconscious. And while he awakes, he's sitting in a police station. It is said by Heirens that while the police were investigating him and, you know, in the interrogation room, he was going in and out of consciousness. Like he really banged his head hard. Mind you, and he's a 17-year-old boy. He is a minor, okay? A minor with a head injury, and the police are interrogating him and interrogating him and interrogating him. This is where it gets bad, and it gets me very upset, okay? William Heirens is 17 years old, and yeah, he's a burglar, okay? Yes, he had a gun. Yes, he did bad. He did something. He wasn't innocent, okay? But there's a code of ethics. There is some police procedures, okay, that should be followed. So they automatically assume that because he broke into this apartment and they had a gun on him, oh man, he's probably, you know, related to those women who were killed, right? Because they're right around the same area, because that's also where William lived, right? So what do the police do? The police start to interrogate this 17-year-old boy for 6 consecutive days. They beat him. They don't feed him. They don't let him drink water. They don't let him see his parents. When he asks for an attorney, he's denied an attorney. He's, you know, in pain. His head is throbbing. He's going through it all for 6 days. Throughout this whole 6-day period, 2 different psych doctors come in. I'm going to give you their names because we're going to quote them, okay? We're going to quote them because they're not going to go unpunished. Their names were Dr. Heirens and Dr. Roy Grinker. These 2 doctors went ahead and distributed sodium pentothal, which is basically the true serum, to this 17-year-old boy without a warrant, without his consent, and they injected him with it. And they tried to use that as a way to get the truth out. If you know anything about the true serum, which I have some notes on it, sodium pentothal this is what it says, okay, because I Googled it. There is no drug proven to cause consistent truth-telling. Subjects questioned while on this are found to be more suggestible and their memory subject to reconstruction and fabrication. While under the influence of the drug, authorities started to say that Heirens admitted to the murders of Frances Brown, Josephine Ross, and Susan Degan. And when Heirens has no recollection of saying any of these things, but they're pumping him with it. And not only did they pump him full of this truth serum, they tried to rush him down the hall to get a lie detector test done as well while he was on it, because they think, oh shit, let's get him pumped up with this, and we're going to ask him all the questions, so let's just tie this up. And while the lie detector test is given, it is proven, it is read to be, the results were inconclusive. Okay, the state's attorney said his results were inconclusive. Like, maybe he was too smart. He was smart enough to beat the lie detector. Okay, not the fact that he was just doped up against his will. I'm so mad, so freaking mad about this. Okay, here, and this is, so there's, remember I told you they were doing this for 6 days. On the 5th day of interrogation, they gave the kid a lumbar puncture. A lumbar puncture without any anesthesia while he's wide awake, because they thought that was going to help them get the truth out. I don't know. I don't know what this was, but a lumbar puncture. If you guys have ever seen anybody get like a spinal tap done, if you've ever had a child and had a spinal block or you guys know how much that hurts. A spinal tap is worse. They did this to this boy, okay? 17 years old, no warrant. After the spinal tap was given and this kid's in excruciating pain, they tried to do the lie detector test again. He couldn't do it. He couldn't even sit up. He couldn't sit up. He was throwing up. He was violently ill. The kid was in a lot of pain. I gotta give myself a minute because it's pissing me off. I don't know who I gotta write, but I'm gonna write somebody a very affirmative email. On July 2nd, the state's attorney came out because it already hit the media that they had this kid in question. He was the one who killed these girls. He was the one who killed the little girl. He killed these women. This was the guy. And, you know, because there was nothing. They put everything out in the media, all right? And the state's attorney said, you know what, this is inconclusive. We really can't say it. Oh, you know, we can't really talk about it because his lie detector test was inconclusive. But we are arresting him and we're going to hold him at Cook County Jail. But because he was so sick from the mistreatment and the abuse, he ended up having to go into the hospital because he was so sick and was so appropriate that the hospital was right across the street from the police department. So the cops would go in there every day while he was in the hospital trying to get better from the ongoing abuse and beat the shit out of him some more and see if he would admit to any of their crimes. So they went ahead and gave George Heirens another dose of the true serum again. And this second time, it said that George Heirens, they went ahead and administered another dose of the true serum of the sodium pentothal, and sat down, the state's attorney and the doctor sat down and questioned William Heirens again about the case. And this is a long time of abuse, okay? He's a young boy. And he told them that maybe it wasn't me. Maybe it was my alter ego and his name is George. Maybe it's another personality I have and his name is George. Maybe George did it. And mind you, this kid is doped up. He's had all this stuff going on. He probably has some, you know, brain damage from concussions. And honestly, he's probably just trying to tell them anything to leave him alone, you know. And they're like, George? He's like, yeah, I think it was my alter ego, George. He may have did it. And he went on to tell him a story that he met George when he was 13, and it was because of George that he would commit all his burglaries, that George was the one who talked him into it, and maybe it was George who committed the crimes, because he doesn't remember it, but maybe George does. They had handwriting and analysis taken. William Heirens' handwriting did not match the one on the ransom note. It did not match the one on the message on the wall. It did not match any of that. Okay, so that wasn't working out in their favor. Also, you have to remember, William Heirens was a very smart kid, okay? 16 years old, he bypassed high school and went right to University of Chicago. That ransom note was written by somebody who barely had an education. So let's call it what it is. He's too smart to have so many errors in spelling. Okay? That's it. I could tell you that right now. And I'm not a cop or a detective, okay? Police claimed that initially when Frances Brown's murder happened, they said that there was no fingerprints. There was nothing there. There was no evidence. And there was a small smudge on the door jamb. Now the police are saying, no, we were mistaken. There's actually a fingerprint, and that fingerprint matches William Heirens. So they were just making up stuff, and there was no one there to... They also said that there was a small pinky fingerprint on the back of the ransom note, and that fingerprint matched the fingerprint of William Heirens. So when they went ahead and did when they went and traced the fingerprint, you have like loops, okay? And there was a 10-point match on the fingerprint, on the pinky fingerprint between George Heirens and the one left on the ransom note. In order for it to be a legit match, it has to be a 12-point match. The 10-point match fits up to 70% of the population, but they had already said, nope, that's his fingerprint. They had released it to the media. No, that was George Heirens. We were finding his fingerprints on murder scenes. This is his, and it's already all over the place. Okay, everybody's talking. His pictures are being taken. He's all over the papers. He's already in the eyes of the public. This is the man. They caught the killer for the two women and the little girl. What comes out later throughout this trial and is that they had people coming in to check out the ransom note, and they totally didn't follow protocol, and they let random people touch this ransom note. So the ransom note wasn't even supposed to be used because it wasn't a preserved piece of evidence. So that piece of evidence should have been thrown out, but they were still using it. And that little fingerprint could have been one of those who were just touching stuff that shouldn't have been in there, but the police were just getting everybody in there and just passing shit out when they shouldn't have, okay? I'm sorry, but I'm so mad about this case. Sorry. June 30th, one of the police captains announced to the media that William Heirens was going to be excluded because his fingerprints didn't match for the murders of, did not match the fingerprints found at the Brown murder, okay? And so that was it. But then a few days later, another police officer came and said, no, we found his fingerprint, and it does match the fingerprint found at the Brown murder. He is the person who was there. So even the police are like flip-flopping. Some people think he did it. Some people think he didn't do it. I think honestly, there was so many people were watching this case, and there was so much pressure from up above that somebody was going to get blamed for it. And so the police went ahead and started searching William Heirens, and they searched his home and they searched his dorm room. Remember, he's a little petty thief, and they ended up finding a scrapbook that had like a bunch of Nazi official stuff, and it belonged to a guy named Harry Gold. All right, and Harry Gold's house was burglarized the same night that Suzanne Dagan was murdered. So in my head, that was his alibi. I mean, it was an illegal alibi, but he had an alibi. He couldn't have killed that little girl because he was robbing someone's home. But the police took it as, oh, Harry Gold lives close to where Suzanne Dagan lived, okay? And it turned out that the gun that Heirens had, that the one that misfired with the police, was a gun that he stole from Harry Gold's house, okay? So that was all related, and Harry Gold came down and he, identified his gun and the stuff that was missing. On July 14th, William Heirens' attorneys met with the state's attorney. The state's attorney was named Toohey. And they met and they talked deals of a plea bargain because they just wanted to wrap this case up, okay? On July 16th, the Chicago Tribune staff reporter falsely wrote in saying that William Heirens admitted to the murder of the two women and the murder of little Suzanne Dagan. He gave graphic details, and yeah, he was the murderer. The case was solved. They put pictures everywhere, and he quoted his, like, cites the quote unimpeachable sources, so he didn't really have to give quotes. I don't know, maybe he has somebody who works in the police office. It's saying that he just pulled the stuff out of his butt. So while he was saying, he wrote it, you know, remember, Chicago Tribune is a huge paper. It's one of the biggest ones, even still to this day in Chicago, and everybody read it. So front newspaper, William Heirens admits to the murder of Francis Ross Brown and Suzanne Degan, and that's it. That's it. So, court of public opinion, this kid is guilty, right? Even though it was a complete lie. He never did any of those things. So the very next day, all other like competing newspapers printed the same exact story, that this kid went ahead and admitted to the murders. They did have one witness for Suzanne Degan's murder. His name was George Subgansky, and he was a next door neighbor, and he told police that that night that she went missing, that he had seen a man, 5'9", what did he say, 5'9", about 170 pounds, around 35 years old, dressed in a light colored fedora and a dark overcap. But due to the lack of light, he couldn't identify his face, but he's seen that man out there. Here's a picture of Mr. Thomas, the one who admitted to the murder of Suzanne Degan. I'm just gonna leave that there. So when the police first did a lineup before, and I'll post a picture of the lineup right here. When the police first did a lineup, and he was, you know, he seen, you know, all the men were lined up, he could not pick out William Heirens. Okay, he did not pick him out. But after the news hit, after his picture was published all over the place, they went into court, and he was sat down, you know, they were questioning the courtroom, and he said, "Can you identify the man that you think you saw?" And he pointed to William Heirens after, you know, a couple weeks after his face was printed all over the place, and he's like, "Yep, that's him, that's the man I saw." Even though the first time he said he couldn't identify him. And he said he couldn't see his face when the police first interviewed him, and then the first time he did the lineup, he couldn't identify him. So the jurors heard this. Okay, they heard it. He said this is him. They ended up having to throw out his, you know, his questioning and his stuff in court because of how it contradicted itself. But the jurors had already heard it. It was already in their mind. And even if you tell them, "Oh, please disregard," they're not going to disregard. Because again, in the court of public opinion, this kid was guilty. Period. Heirens' defense attorney, they thought he was guilty. And they told him that. "We know you're guilty. We know you did it. You don't have to tell us. But our job right now is basically just to save you from going to the chair. So that's what we're going to do." His attorneys basically told him, "You need to take this plea deal or you're going to die. So take it and let's just wrap this up and let's just save your life this way, because this is all we can do for you at this point." The plea deal would be a life sentence for the murders, the 3 murders, basically, the 2 women and the little girl, and he would just have to allocute to his crimes. So he began to sit there and write out his confession. And Heirens said that, you know, when he was later interviewed, that his confession was basically verbatim of what he read in the newspapers of what happened. There was no intricate details or anything like that. It was what the newspapers reported, and that's what he wrote. So when his confession was already written out, he had to sign it, and then they made his 2 parents sign it as well. So Heirens had to go to the state's attorney's office, and there he was supposed to allocute his crimes in front of the media, and he wanted them to go ahead and tell everybody everything and describe in detail of the murders. And when Heirens went in front of the media and was supposed to allocute, he told them, "I didn't do it, I'm innocent." And boy oh boy, the state's attorney got real pissed off. So he withdrew his initial plea bargain, and he told them, if you're not going to allocute, if you're not going to take this plea bargain, you're going to get the death penalty and you will die. So he just decided, you know what, I don't want to die, and maybe I can, you know, they'll come out with more information and more proof that I'm innocent. So he allocated, he took the plea deal, but the plea deal was now changed because he pissed off the state's attorney the first time, and they changed it to 3 life sentences, 1 for each victim. You know, he allocuted and he even like reenacted some parts of the crime. Again, it said that it's every, and if I kind of read it, and it is something, I read what he wrote and then I read some of the excerpts from the Sun-Times and the Tribune, and it was verbatim. He basically plagiarized their stories for his confession. And when he was being escorted to the jail, and one of the guys said, you know, why'd you kill them? And he said, I didn't kill them. They're like, well, why'd you confess? He said, I did it to save my life. In his confession, he said that he took the knife that he used to dismember Suzanne Degen and he threw it on the L tracks. And the police never looked for this knife. They never looked for this murder weapon. But supposedly the reporters did. The reporters did, and the reporters found this knife. And it ended up being, then the reporters ended up questioning that Harry Gold, the one whose gun he stole, and that was his knife. He said that that was his knife, and he must have stole it from him too. And that's how that went. But the police never even found this weapon. It was never entered into evidence or anything like that. They didn't care. And, you know, you can't trust the media. I mean, if you're a reporter, I'm sorry, but you can't be trusted. And then supposedly he said, Heirens told the police that the reason why he threw the knife over by the L is because he didn't want his parents to see it. But that's bullshit, because he didn't even live with his parents. He lived in a dorm room. So that's crap. You know what I mean? Like, it's just crap. It's like, but people bought it. They bought it. On September 4th, 1946, Heirens went to court with his parents and the families of the victims, and he basically allocuted and met with the judge, and on September 5th, he was sentenced to 3 life sentences. Within days of his confession and being sent to jail, he was denying. Heirens denied the murders. He said, I did not do this. I didn't. And I can't imagine how frustrating it must be to know that you didn't commit these crimes and nobody would believe you. Josephine Ross's daughter, okay, the very first victim, she believed that Heirens did not murder her mother. She believed him. So years had passed now, and Heirens had, you know, he went to jail. And so after September 5th, he was sentenced to, you know, 3 life sentences, and Heirens was sent to Statesville to complete his sentence, right? Statesville's where everybody goes here, basically. They start off there at least. In 1953, so, you know, quite a few years later, you know, what is it, about 6 years later, 7 years later, a book came out about the polygraph test that was performed on George Heirens, or William George Heirens, and they said that the results were not inconclusive. This was a polygraph specialist, and he was an FBI agent, and he said that the polygraph was not inconclusive. It showed that he was innocent, that he was not lying, and that's what the results should have read, not inconclusive. More studies have shown that the fingerprints did not match, that they did a 22-point match, and there was no matching. There was no way in hell that that fingerprint matched William Heirens, that there was no match. There was no evidence there that they could not match it. And that smudge print, there was no fingerprint there either. So there was no way to link him to any of these murder scenes or crimes. And when William Heirens gave his confession and people read through it, there were 29 inconsistencies in his story that just proved he didn't know what the hell he was talking about when he was allocuting for these crimes. He basically just rewrote what the newspapers were saying, and the newspapers had stuff wrong. So even then, it was wrong. And let's not forget Russell Thomas, the one who admitted to murdering Suzanne Degen. He died in jail in the 70s. He never recanted his story. He got away with it. He died. Another person, that's the one who everybody believes murdered Suzanne Degen, okay? For the 2 other women, Ross and Brown, it is said that, what is George Hodel? You guys know who George Hodel is, right? George Hodel is the Black Dahlia killer and the Zodiac killer. That he was actually here in Chicago when those 2 women were murdered, and the black hair that was found clenched in their hands, because I think I forgot to tell you guys that, but for Ross, Josephine Ross, she had black hair clenched in her hands. He has black hair. And it was actually George Hodell's son who ended up being a cop later on in life, and he was the one who kind of outed his dad for all his murders. He was the one who said, I believe those two women were victims of my father. I don't think all three of them, I think the two first women, I think they were definitely the same murderer, very similar case, but I don't think all three of them had a common denominator. I think the two older women did, but I think the third little girl was either somebody, it could have been that Thomas guy, or it could have been just somebody from the meat cutting. So after the trial, Heirens' parents divorced. They ended up changing their name, and Heirens started to serve his time. He did really well in jail. He was, it's funny to see how people spend their time. So he learned several trades. He was really into electronics. He could fix TVs, he could fix radios. He ended up having like a little repair shop in his cell. And then he was also the very first inmate to ever get a bachelor's degree. And he did that he paid for it on his own money by, he would earn money from, fixing stuff. And he had a bachelor degree in arts. He, also had correspondence with 20 different universities where he studied languages, geometry, data processing, and tailoring. He was forbidden from learning like biochemical stuff because, in prison they don't want him like making stuff. But he did really, really well. With the tailoring, he ended up running the prison garment, the garment factory in the prison. And he was the head person for like 5 years. He had 350 inmates under him. And he did really, really well there as well. He was later transferred to Vienna Correctional Institute, which was like a minimum security prison. And when he got there, he ended up setting up an educational program for other inmates. So he was able to help other inmates receive their GED, and then they can continue on to, junior college, and if they wanted to get like a bachelor's degree, he would help them as well. He also learned a lot about law while he was in there, and he ended up becoming like essentially an in-house like attorney, they call it in-house jail attorney, and he helped a lot of people fight appeals and stuff like that for their cases. He was a really well-liked prisoner. Wardens spoke in his behalf that he was a really great prisoner. He was just, they said if all of them could be like this, it would be a great place. He served his time well, and he didn't give anybody any problems. So in 1965, he was given institutional parole for the murder of Suzanne Degan. And in 66, he was discharged from parole, even though he was still in jail, and basically that case could no longer be used against him. And then he was to start on his second life sentence for the other two crimes, okay? So he should have been discharged in 75 for the Brown murder and 83 for the Ross murder. So he should have been let out in 1983. In 1973, they had the focus moved from rehabilitation to punishment in the jail system. So it wasn't about rehabilitating him, because he was rehabilitated. He did really well. Like I said, he had wardens speak on his behalf. He had guards, everybody, the priests inside the ministers inside the jail, everybody spoke up for him. Everybody liked him, okay? He was a really well-liked man. And in 73, when he finished that second sentence, they said, no, this is not about rehabilitation. He needs to be punished for what he did. In 1983, the Court of Appeals, let me read this to you, ruled that it was unconstitutional to refuse parole on the grounds of punishment and ordered for him to be released immediately. Suzanne Degan had two siblings. She had a younger brother and an older sister. And the parents had passed away at this time, okay? And they caught wind that he was going to be released, and they did not like it, okay? They did not like it, and they spoke out to the media. They went to the courts, and they begged him not to be released. He does not need to be released. He needs to spend the rest of his life in jail. Do not release him. And the courts eventually overturned their rule and said he needs to stay in there. I understand that the siblings were upset about their sister, but also they needed to do their due diligence and maybe researched everything that happened, because maybe I understand as a child they don't know, and he's the boogeyman, he's the bad guy, and everybody hates him. But the brother said that when he was a little bit older, he spoke to a couple police officers, and they assured him that he was guilty, and that was all he needed to know. Okay, but I also I really wish they would have taken the time to do the research and to actually see the bigger picture. And I understand it's a lot for me to say to them because I wouldn't know. But so in 1975, he was, like I said, he was transferred to that minimum security prison, Vienna, where he did really well. Like I said, he made the educational programs, helped other inmates get their GEDs, and he just kind of served his time there. In 1988, he requested to be transferred to Dixon Hospital, and then at that time, he just basically lived inside their hospital ward. He was a really bad diabetic. He ended up losing some of his vision. You know, when you have uncontrolled diabetes, it really messes with you. So he ended up losing some of his vision. His legs were really swollen, and so he was kind of bound to a wheelchair, and he just wasn't healthy. Throughout the early 90s, a lot of Northwestern University has a law school there, and their law school does a lot of cases where they try to get people who they feel were wrongly convicted out of prison, and nobody would budge on releasing George Heirens. Even George Ryan, who was the governor, if you guys ever heard of George Ryan, he was one of our many governors who also served time in one of our correctional institutions. He would not give him clemency. Richard Daley, who was the mayor of Chicago, he was totally against trying to get him out of jail as well. Basically, I feel like anybody in politics just stood for, like, nobody cared. He was like out of sight, out of mind, and nobody wanted to touch that case with a 10-foot pole, to be honest with you. I think it's because so much corruption had happened. You also have to remember that George Ryan allowed clemency for anybody that was on death row here in Illinois because there were so many wrongly convicted inmates that have been proven. Because now, throughout all these years, which you guys can look into it, there has been a lot of police officers who have gotten into a lot of stuff has come to the light where they were getting phony confessions out of people by beating the shit out of them. So it's a lot of that going on around here. In 2002, Lawrence Marshall filed a petition of clemency, and he just believed that he was going to be, that he believed that he was innocent. He believed that Heirens was innocent, and he served his time, and they wanted to let him out. They had a parole board hearing on July 26, 2007, and 14-0 agreed that he should not be released, and they believed he was guilty. And the head person for the parole board, I'm also going to quote his name. His name was Thomas Johnson, and he said, quote, "God will forgive you, but the state won't. Stay your ass in jail." So he was not released. But they did agree to go ahead and revisit his parole, him for parole every year. February 26, 2012, Heirens was not feeling good, and he was admitted to the University of Chicago at Illinois Medical Center for his diabetes. He just wasn't doing well, and he was struggling. And like I said, his diabetes was super uncontrolled. On March 5th, 2012, William Heirens did die at 83 years old due to complications of diabetes. He was in custody for 65 years. He was one of Illinois' most long-serving inmates. And that, my friends, is the case of the lipstick killer. This case struck so many nerves with me. Sometimes when I do these cases, when I don't know about them, I kind of just want to know who the bad guy is. And in this case, the bad guy was the good guys. Was the good guys that we're supposed to be protecting, they were the bad guys. I 150% do not believe he was guilty of the murders of those two women and that little girl. 150%. I think they let an innocent man rot in jail because they just had to get the job done. I've seen interviews of people, and they still say, like, you know, state's attorneys, not the newest one that we have now, but the one in the, like, I think it was like 96, and he said, I read over what the court case and the findings, and I believe what they believe. I think he's guilty. He should rot in that jail. How can you believe he's guilty? How can you? Like, he literally was prosecuted by the court of public opinion. He was not going to get there was going to be no decent trial for him. He was never going to get a fair shot. Never was. and that was it. I don't understand how Nathan Leopold, who admitted to murdering that little boy, got out. Okay, he got out in the 60s, but Heirens had to spend 65 years in jail. Maybe it's because Leopold had money. I don't know. Probably it's because he had money. It's just, it infuriates me, and I don't know. This case made me sick. I do want to say rest in peace to that poor little girl, to Suzanne Degan. I want to say rest in peace to Josephine Ross. I want to say rest in peace to Miss Brown. I want to, to their families. I hope they find closure. And, but I feel like I also want to say that I feel really bad for the mistrial and the mistreatment of William Heirens. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you guys think he's innocent? Do you guys think he did it? Do you think he was just a fall guy? What I think, this is who, when you think who done it, I 150% think it was George Waddell who murdered the two women. The way everything was, his motive, everything. If you guys ever look into the Black Dahlia killings and all that stuff, it's very similar. Okay, the MO was very similar. I definitely believe it was him. Now for Suzanne Degnan, I don't know. I don't think a nurse has the skill to chop up that little girl like that. I think that had something to do with the meat packers. Also, I feel like if you're a nurse, you have to be, you're pretty educated. Whoever wrote that ransom note was not educated. So even though this guy may have admitted to it, he may have been a culprit in it. I definitely think the meat packers, somebody from the meat packing plant was in on it. That's just my thought. But I'm closing this up. You know what? I want to write somebody a letter. And I want to just say, you know what, this is unjustifiable, but one of those cases, this pisses me off. If you guys are new here, hey, how are you? My name's Danielle. We do true crime series twice a month, and I hope you guys enjoy it. If you guys are just popping in, I hope you guys stick around. We do a lot of good stuff around here. And yeah, I'm going to sign off because I'm aggravated. I love you guys. See you on the next one. Take it easy, friends.